Welcome to Cine Pro, where movies come alive. We recap the twists, so let's dive. A young man, outcast and ignored by everyone at his school, gains superhuman powers after being bitten by a genetically modified dragonfly. Today, we're recapping the 2008 movie Superhero. Rick is the target of relentless bullying from his classmates and has only one friend, Trey. Every morning, the two meet on the same school bus. But on this particular day, their class from Empire City High is heading to an animal research laboratory for a field trip. On the way there, Rick observes the other students and feels out of place, realizing he doesn't belong to any group. He's simply a member of the school newspaper and harbors a secret crush on Jill Johnson, a girl who barely notices him. Jill, however, is dating Lance Landers, the school's bully. Upon arrival at the laboratory, the class is welcomed by Dr. Strom, the lead researcher, who begins explaining that the animals in the facility are genetically modified and possess unique characteristics. Spotting Jill admiring a bird, Rick seizes the chance to approach her. Nervously, he strikes up a brief conversation and mentions that he's photographing the bird for the school newspaper. Before their interaction can continue, Dr. Strom steps in and reminds the students that they are strictly prohibited from feeding or photographing the animals. Dr. Strom continues his explanation, emphasizing that most of the genetically modified animals in the lab are sensitive to light. Ignoring the warnings, Rick snaps a photo of a bird, causing it to combust instantly. Panicked, Rick tries to extinguish the flames, but his efforts fail as the bird's body is already consumed. In a desperate and clumsy attempt to contain the fire, Rick accidentally kicks the charred remains toward Lance. Furious, Lance charges at Rick, determined to teach him a lesson. Jill steps in, attempting to stop Lance, but her efforts prove futile. Lance is only restrained by the sudden arrival of his uncle, Lou Landers, who happens to be the lab's chief executive. Lou immediately recognizes Rick by his surname and mentions that he knew Rick's parents. However, Rick explains that they passed away a long time ago and that he now lives with his aunt and uncle. As they converse, Rick notices something odd about Lou's health and expresses concern, but Lou dismisses it, claiming he's fine. Once Lou leaves, Lance seizes the opportunity to push Rick into an area filled with animal excrement. Covered in filth, Rick searches for something to clean himself with and finds a bottle containing a clear liquid that resembles water. Without hesitation, he uses the substance to clean his shirt. Dr. Strom informs the students that the lab team is conducting groundbreaking experiments using a highly potent pheromone. This substance affects the nervous systems of the animals, triggering a strong urge to reproduce. At that moment, Rick realizes the liquid he used to clean himself wasn't water. It was the lab's reproduction pheromone. Within seconds, animals of various species driven by the pheromone begin advancing toward Rick. Among them, a genetically modified dragonfly that had been hiding suddenly bites Rick on the neck. Later that evening, Rick's aunt and uncle receive a call from the school, informing them that Rick ran off during the lab excursion. Shortly afterward, Rick arrives home in terrible condition. However, his aunt and uncle dismiss his symptoms, assuming he's simply going through puberty. Up in his room, Rick struggles with overwhelming symptoms. His uncle Albert attempts to talk to him, but before they can have a conversation, Rick collapses from exhaustion. Meanwhile, back at the research laboratory, Lou Landers, the company's executive, is preparing to showcase his latest project to the staff. Lou Landers gathers the lab employees and announces that he only has an hour to live. Determined to extend his life, he unveils his invention, a machine designed to grant him a longer existence. With Dr. Strom's assistance, Lou undergoes a painful process using the device to demonstrate its potential. Initially, the employees believe the machine has failed, assuming Lou will perish as predicted. However, Lou suddenly grabs the arm of one of the staff members and, with just a touch, drains all of the man's vital energy. Rejuvenated and more powerful than ever, Lou quickly begins to absorb the life force of everyone in the room, leaving no one spared. The next day, Rick wakes up feeling perfectly fine, with no trace of the symptoms he experienced the night before. Not even the dragonfly bite mark remains. Still concerned, Rick goes to his computer to research whether the dragonfly bite could have caused a serious illness. While filling out an online form, he is contacted by an anonymous user on a social network. This mysterious individual claims to know the answer to Rick's problem and hints that they will meet very soon. That morning, Empire City High School receives a special guest, the renowned theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking. Students gather in awe for his visit. At the science fair, Rick realizes that Jill is also there and tries to calm down so he can go and talk to the girl. The young man goes to a drinking fountain, but his hands get stuck in the object, and he has to use a lot of force to get them out, throwing the thing at Lance. The bully proceeds to beat up the nerd, and people quickly start watching the two of them fight. Rick manages to dodge all of his opponent's attacks with incredibly quick reflexes. However, Rick ends up losing his focus and takes a supreme beating from the bully. The young man causes a stir at the science fair, and Stephen Hawking ends up being thrown into a glass with several hunter bees. The animals escape, and chaos takes over the school. Later, Rick returns home disappointed. He walks down the street, and at the sight of an empty alley, he tries once again to use his special abilities. He puts his hands on a wall and begins to climb with great ease while discovering some of his new skills. Rick notices a truck speeding uncontrollably, heading straight toward an elderly woman crossing the street. Acting instinctively, he rushes to save her, stopping the truck with his body using incredible strength. The bystanders are amazed, labeling him a new superhero. However, Rick quickly realizes that in pushing the woman out of the truck's path, he inadvertently sent her flying into a nearby industrial crusher. Horrified, he returns home and shares the day's events with his uncle Albert and his friend Trey, explaining that he might have developed superpowers from the dragonfly bite. Albert, skeptical but curious, decides to test Rick's claims. He fires a nail at his nephew, and Rick effortlessly catches it mid-air. Impressed, Albert then fires a nail at Trey, who immediately collapses, proving that Rick's abilities are indeed extraordinary. Rick further explains that he was able to see Lance's punches coming at school with incredible clarity. To confirm this enhanced reflex, Albert punches Trey again, and the poor guy takes the hit, solidifying Rick's claim of his heightened senses. Later that night, Rick retreats to the backyard, reflecting on the strange and overwhelming events that have turned his life upside down. Rick holds the family ring that his father gave him during his final moments and recalls the tragic day his parents perished. On that fateful evening, his family had just left a concert and, while passing through an alley, noticed several people in desperate situations. Young Rick expressed his dream to his father, saying he wanted to grow up to help change their lives. On their way home, a thief suddenly approached them, demanding all their valuables. Rick's father tried to fight back, successfully preventing the thief from firing his gun initially. Wanting to help, young Rick jumped into the struggle but accidentally got in the way, causing the thief to fire several shots at his parents. The thief then fled the scene, leaving Rick to witness the devastating aftermath. With his dying breaths, Rick's father handed him the family ring, explaining that their entire fortune would now belong to him. As his last piece of advice, he urged Rick to sell all their shares in Google, claiming that the company had no future. Following his father's advice, Rick lost the family's entire fortune. In the present, Rick encounters Jill, who also happens to be his neighbor. The two strike up a conversation and bond over their mutual struggles. Jill confides in Rick about her own struggles, revealing that she doesn't want to go to college and dreams of pursuing a career as a dancer. Their conversation is interrupted when Lance pulls up in his car and invites Jill on a date. Before leaving, Jill looks at Rick and says, "Maybe one day we could go for a drive too," giving him a small glimmer of hope. Inspired by her comment, Rick starts researching car prices the next morning, only to realize that his savings aren't enough to buy even the cheapest model. As he contemplates his situation, he receives a video message from the same unknown user who promised to help him. However, the video is corrupted, leaving Rick more confused than ever. Later that morning, Rick goes with his uncles to a bank to apply for a loan. Despite his best efforts, the manager rejects him due to his lack of employment history. Frustrated, Rick pleads his case, but the manager dismisses him, saying, "It's not my problem," and orders him to leave. As they're leaving, a robber bursts into the bank, demanding all the money. When he tries to escape, he struggles to open the exit door, and Rick surprisingly helps him out. Confronted by the bank manager, Rick repeats his earlier words, "It's not my problem." Moments later, the sound of gunfire erupts outside, and a crowd gathers on the street. Rick rushes to the commotion only to find a performance involving a dancing monkey. Just as he begins to relax, he notices his uncle lying on the ground, severely wounded from the gunfire. With his final breath, Rick's uncle urges him to use his powers responsibly, reminding him that, "With great power comes great responsibility." The words weigh heavily on Rick as he watches his uncle pass away. Meanwhile, at the city's laboratory, Lou Landers suffers the devastating effects of his experiment. His vitality drains rapidly, leaving him in a fragile and deteriorating state. When one of his employees enters to assist him, Lou instinctively absorbs her energy, restoring his strength and becoming more powerful than before. At the hospital, Jill visits Rick to offer comfort. A doctor delivers the grim news. Rick's uncle is unlikely to survive due to the severity of his injuries. Devastated, Rick leaves the hospital and heads home, overwhelmed by guilt and sadness. On his way, he encounters a mysterious man who introduces himself as Charles Xavier. To Rick's surprise, Xavier reveals that he is the anonymous individual who contacted him earlier. Xavier explains that he has the power to read minds and offers to help Rick become a hero. Xavier takes Rick to his school for mutants, a haven where students with extraordinary abilities are trained. Some have common powers, while other students at Charles Xavier's school possess relatively common powers, like elasticity, while others have bizarre and extreme abilities, such as a boy who can eliminate anyone in front of him with just a sneeze. During the tour, Rick encounters well-known superheroes like Wolverine, Storm, and the Invisible Woman. He also meets Mrs. Xavier, who explains that the first step to becoming a superhero is designing his own costume. Motivated, Rick returns home and spends days locked in his room, working on his suit. When it's finally finished, Trey comes over to check it out and is impressed, until they realize Rick forgot to add vents to the costume, making it impossible for him to see properly. After making the necessary adjustments, Rick feels ready to start his superhero journey. Climbing to the top of a building to observe the city, Rick encounters the Human Torch. They chat about their powers, and the Human Torch offers to demonstrate his ability. With the iconic phrase, "Flame on," his entire body becomes engulfed in fire. However, things quickly take a turn when he starts panicking from the overwhelming heat. Rick tries to help by grabbing a fire extinguisher, but his efforts fail miserably. Despite his good intentions, the situation escalates, leaving both of them in a chaotic mess. Deciding to test the limits of his dragonfly powers, Rick jumps off the building, expecting to fly, but quickly realizes he cannot. As days pass, Empire City begins to notice the heroic deeds of its new vigilante, the Dragonfly. Rick gains recognition for saving people from danger, defeating criminals, and maintaining peace in the city. Meanwhile, at the research lab, Dr. Strom informs Lou Landers of a grim consequence of his newfound power. To survive, Lou must drain at least one life each day, or he will perish. Lou, disturbed yet determined, begins formulating a plan to ensure his survival, promising to put it into action soon. Back in the city, Rick notices the growing popularity of his alter ego, the Dragonfly. While reading the newspaper, he learns they are offering payment for photos of the superhero. Seeing an opportunity to make money, Rick heads to the newspaper office. Upon arriving, he is greeted by a man who appears to be the editor but turns out to be an escaped patient from the mental hospital located in the same building. Moments later, the real editor enters and clarifies the situation, apologizing for the confusion. Rick shows the editor several photos of the Dragonfly, hoping to earn some cash. However, the editor wants photos of the superhero in action. One of the newspaper staff rushes into the editor's office, announcing that the police have surrounded Empire University. Hearing this, Rick wastes no time and heads straight to the scene as Dragonfly. At the university, the police are caught off guard by the appearance of a new villain, Hourglass, whose sinister goal is to drain as much life energy as possible from the people around him. Dragonfly arrives just in time and confronts the villain, landing a powerful punch. This sparks a heated physical battle between the two. However, during the fight, both Dragonfly and Hourglass momentarily find themselves stunned. Regaining his footing, Hourglass uses his titanium blades against Dragonfly. Despite Dragonfly's best efforts to dodge, he is struck multiple times, leaving him injured. The villain taunts the hero, declaring that he won't let anyone interfere with his plans. He then destroys a wall and escapes, leaving Dragonfly unable to stop him. Defeated and wounded, Rick returns home, where his friend Trey helps him tend to his injuries. While gazing at Jill through his bedroom window, Rick is approached by his aunt, who offers him some heartfelt advice. She warns him that Dragonfly must never reveal his true identity, as it would put the people he loves most in danger from his enemies. That evening, Rick heads out to watch his friend perform but arrives late. Shortly afterward, Jill approaches him and asks if he's hiding something. Rick hesitates but ultimately denies having anything to share. Disappointed, Jill says goodbye and heads home. On her way, Jill is confronted by a group of criminals. She tries to escape but ends up cornered in a dark alley with nowhere to run. Just when the situation seems hopeless, Dragonfly swoops in and defeats the bandits in seconds using his incredible strength. Grateful, Jill thanks the hero with a kiss before he rushes off to continue helping the citizens of Empire City. A few days later, Jill visits Rick's aunt to help prepare a special dinner. She plans to spend the evening with her boyfriend Lance and Rick's aunt to keep her company. During the preparations, Lance informs Jill that his uncle, Lou Landers, will also be joining them for dinner. Rick's aunt doesn't mind his presence, but quickly notices that Rick hasn't arrived yet. Suspecting that he might still be in his room, she decides to call him. However, Lou Landers volunteers to go upstairs and check on Rick. At that very moment, Rick climbs through his bedroom window after one of his superhero outings. Hearing someone approaching, he quickly tries to hide as Landers enters the room, suspicious that the young man is there. Landers searches the entire space, but Rick cleverly finds ways to stay out of sight. Eventually, Landers gives up and returns to the kitchen. Moments later, Rick enters through the front door, apologizing for being late and joining everyone at the dinner table. As they sit down, Landers notices wounds on Rick's arm and questions him about them. Rick brushes it off, claiming he got injured at work. His aunt then adds that Rick works as a photographer for the hero, Dragonfly. Landers begins piecing together the events and quickly forms a suspicion. Excusing himself, he tells the group he has an emergency to attend to and leaves abruptly. Later that night, Rick confides in Jill, revealing that he knows Dragonfly. Excited, Jill admits she's in love with the hero and expresses her desire to meet him one day. Buoyed by her words, Rick starts to confess his feelings for Jill. However, their tender moment is suddenly interrupted by Rick's aunt, who, while asleep, releases a thunderous fart so powerful that parts of the house begin to crumble. At that chaotic moment, Hourglass makes a dramatic entrance, ready to confront his enemies. Hourglass, during his dramatic intrusion, uncovers Dragonfly's true identity. Rick attempts to stop him but is easily overpowered. Hourglass taunts Rick, stating that while he doesn't intend to eliminate his rival just yet, he plans to destroy what Rick holds most dear. Without hesitation, Hourglass approaches Rick's aunt and with a single touch, drains all her vitality. Devastated, Rick rushes her to the hospital only to be told that she has passed away. In a bittersweet twist, Rick's uncle, Albert, awakens from his coma and recovers. But the joy is short-lived as he learns of his wife's death. A few days later, family and friends gather for the funeral. Overwhelmed with grief, Albert struggles to cope. During the ceremony, unable to contain his sorrow, he attempts to climb into what he believes is his wife's coffin. However, the body inside belongs to another woman who had also passed away, forcing him to awkwardly retreat. Eventually, Albert finds his wife's coffin. In his emotional outburst, he again approaches the casket, but this time the body falls out of the structure and accidentally catches fire due to a nearby bonfire. Chaos ensues, leaving everyone at the funeral in shock. In the aftermath of the commotion, Jill tries to talk to Rick, hoping to offer comfort and reconnect. However, Rick coldly tells her that he doesn't love her and insists that they both move on with their lives. Rick, shaken by the loss of his aunt and his decision to distance himself from Jill to protect her, struggles to find his footing as a hero. Days pass, and his grief is evident. But with support from Albert and Trey, Rick is encouraged to rise again as the protector of Empire City. He knows defeating Hourglass is his only option. Rick deduces that the villain's plan revolves around draining the vitality of a large crowd, but he's unsure where Hourglass might strike next. At that moment, they notice an article in the newspaper announcing a prestigious award ceremony set to honor heroic acts. The event will draw a massive crowd, an ideal target for Hourglass. Albert drives Rick and Trey to the venue. As they arrive, they see countless celebrities in attendance, including Lou Landers. During the ceremony, Landers is the first to receive an award. However, he shows no interest in the honor, focusing solely on enacting his evil plan. Backstage, Rick confronts Landers, demanding answers about Hourglass. Landers responds with a calm and cryptic remark, suggesting that the villain could be the next prize winner. He points to the stage and jokingly implies that even the Dalai Lama could be Hourglass. At that moment, the curtains open, revealing Dragonfly charging onto the stage and attacking the Dalai Lama, creating complete chaos. The ceremony descends into pandemonium as the venue becomes a battleground for celebrities and onlookers. Amidst the turmoil, Jill notices Landers using the life-draining device and realizes he is Hourglass. The villain emerges from the chaos and begins his plan to drain the crowd's vitality. Dragonfly pursues him, crashing through a wall and ending up at a nearby costume convention. Hourglass attempts to escape in a flying machine but accidentally causes the roof to collapse, landing directly on top of Dragonfly. Taking advantage of the situation, Hourglass hurls a titanium blade at Rick. Jill steps in to protect him, taking the hit and collapsing from her injuries. As Hourglass flees, Rick rushes to Jill's side, trying to comfort her. Just then, Stephen Hawking, present at the ceremony, encourages Rick to continue his fight. Despite not knowing how to fly, Hawking reminds him that he possesses Rick channels his willpower, inspired by Hawking's words, and sets off to confront Hourglass. The villain, now relentless in his pursuit of immortality, begins draining the vitality of countless people. Rick intervenes just in time, disrupting the machine and successfully restoring Jill to normal. With Jill saved, Dragonfly enters a final showdown against Hourglass. The villain hurls a bomb at Rick, and to his dismay, Rick's body becomes stuck to the explosive due to its adhesive properties. Realizing he has no choice, Rick charges toward Hourglass, detonating the bomb in close proximity to them both. The explosion marks the end of Hourglass, but the destruction causes Jill to fall from the building. Without hesitation, Rick leaps after her, catching her mid-air. As they plummet, Jill notices the ring Rick is wearing, the same one that belonged to his father, and realizes Dragonfly's true identity. Rick assures her that he would never leave her, and as Jill kisses him, his Dragonfly wings finally activate. The hero takes flight, carrying Jill through the skies of Empire City. Rick promises her and the city that he will always be a hero who defends humanity from evil. But just as the romantic moment soars to new heights, a helicopter crashes into them, leaving their fate hilariously uncertain. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.